I scattered my daughter's ashes in Georgian Bay 2 years ago. Last Tuesday, I watched her order a medium dark roast 3 people ahead of me in the Tim Hortons on King Street. I had not slept well the night before. That is the only way I know how to explain what happened next. That for just a moment, I told myself I was wrong. I told myself it was someone who looked like her. Someone with the same dark hair cut to the jaw, the same way of shifting her weight to the left hip while she waited. People resemble each other. It happens. Then she laughed. My daughter had a very specific laugh. It started high, then dipped, then ended in a half exhale through the nose that she'd been embarrassed about as a teenager. I had heard that laugh thousands of times over 36 years. I knew it the way I know my own breathing. My hand went still on my wallet. She took her coffee without looking back. I stood at the counter for I don't know how long before the young man behind the register said, quietly, that the lady behind me was waiting. I apologized. I paid. I walked outside into the November cold with my cup in my hand, and I looked up and down King Street, and she was gone. I sat in my car for 40 minutes before I could drive. Her name was Imogen. She was 36 years old, a bookkeeper for a dental supply company in Guelph, a woman who kept too many houseplants and never remembered to water them, who had strong opinions about the order dishes should be washed, who called me every Sunday without fail from the time she moved out until the November. 2 years ago, when the Ontario Provincial Police called me at 11:10 on a Wednesday night to tell me there had been an accident on Highway 6 near Shallow Lake, and I should come in the morning. The car had gone off the road in the dark. Ice, they thought, though the temperature had not dropped below 0 that day. It had caught fire. They were very sorry. They were very sorry a number of times. I made the drive to Owen Sound alone. My nephew, Bram, met me there. He was the one who sat beside me while the officer explained about the dental records, about the process, about what identifying remains looked like when fire had been involved. He was the one who drove me home afterward. He was the one who arranged the memorial service because I was not capable. He was my sister's only son, 9 years younger than my daughter. Someone she had grown up teasing and tormenting the way older children do, someone who had grown into a man she'd become genuinely close to as adults. I thought his grief was real. I believed his grief was real. I watched him cry at her memorial, and I held his hand, and I thought, at least we have each other. The urn sat on my mantel for 4 months, before I could bring myself to do anything with it. In June, on a weekend that was warm enough, I drove to Collingwood and took a small rented boat out onto Georgian Bay. I had a thermos of tea. I set her name into the water, and I let the ashes go, and I watched them disperse on the surface, which took longer than I had imagined. Then I drove home, and I continued the business of not being destroyed by loss, which is its own full-time occupation. That was the end of it, I thought. The Tim Hortons on King Street East is 2 doors down from the physiotherapy clinic where I go every Tuesday morning for my hip. I have been going to the same location for 11 months. I always stop in after my appointment, always order the same thing, always sit at the same table by the window for 20 minutes before driving home. It is a small ritual, the kind a person builds when they are living alone and need to give the days a shape. I knew what I had seen. The crescent-shaped scar below her left ear. She had got it in a bicycle accident when she was 9, skidding off the driveway into the edge of the garage wall. I had cleaned that wound on the bathroom floor of our house on Sanford Avenue while she cried. It had taken 6 stitches at the walk-in clinic on Stone Road. The scar had never fully faded. It sat just below her earlobe like a small parenthesis, and I had looked at it across dinner tables and in photographs, and when I kissed her cheek for 27 years. The woman at the counter had turned slightly when the barista called out her order, and I had seen it. Scars don't migrate between people. I did not call my nephew that night. I made myself wait. I had learned in the past 2 years that grief builds elaborate architecture if you let it. I had heard my daughter's voice in grocery stores. I had seen her coat on strangers. I was familiar with all of that, but I had also taken a photograph. When she turned to take her cup, I had lifted my phone out of reflex and captured one blurred, mostly useless image. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the old photo albums out in front of me. Her at 17, at 24. At the birthday dinner 3 years ago, where she'd complained the whole time about the restaurant's noise, and I zoomed into the photo on my phone until the image broke apart into pixels. And even then, underneath the blur, the jaw, the ear, the scar, I pulled out her last school photo. I pulled out the picture from the Christmas before she died. I set my phone beside them. I did not sleep. I called my nephew the next morning. I said, "I think I saw Imogen yesterday." The pause before he answered was exactly the wrong length. Not the pause of someone surprised. Not the exhale of someone needing a second to absorb something terrible. It was the pause of someone purchasing time. He said very carefully, "Aunt Nell, grief can do things to a person. Did you sleep last night? Have you spoken to Dr. Mehta recently?" I wrote those words down after we hung up. I wrote them down because I recognized what they were. They were a set of words that had been thought about before. They were a response prepared in advance for a question he had been expecting to receive one day. He did not say, "That's impossible." He did not say, "She's gone." He said the words of someone steering me away from something real. I did not call him again. I found a private investigator through a referral from a former colleague at the school board who had used one during a difficult divorce. The investigator was a woman in her early 50s who worked out of an office above a print shop on Barton Street. She had short gray hair and a way of listening that made me feel every word I said was being filed in the right place. I told her everything without editorializing. The accident, the dental records, the ashes, the coffee shop, the scar, the phone call with my nephew. She asked one question: how did the cremation happen, and who made those arrangements? I told her my nephew had handled it. He said it was the least he could do. She nodded once and named her fee. I wrote the check. Over the next 10 days, I continued my life on the surface. Physiotherapy on Tuesdays, the library volunteer shift on Thursdays, calls with friends who still checked in. Underneath that surface, I waited. She called me on a Friday evening. "The life insurance policy," she said, without preamble. "Your daughter had a group benefits policy through her employer. The named beneficiary had been you for most of her working life. 14 months before her death, she changed it. The payout went to your nephew, $340,000 in 2 installments. He has been making regular e-transfers since then, monthly, to an account in Thunder Bay registered to a woman named Viveka Cleo Morrison. Cleo was my daughter's middle name. She had been named for my mother and had spent most of her childhood resenting it, then quietly made peace with it somewhere in her 30s. She had mentioned once, as an adult, that if she ever needed to start over, she'd go by Cleo. I had thought she was joking. She was not joking. The investigator kept going. My daughter had been caught. Her employer had been conducting a quiet internal audit for months before her death. They had found $147,000 missing across 3 years, taken in small amounts, the kind designed to stay below the threshold of notice. She had known the audit was closing in. She'd had perhaps 3 weeks before they went to the police. The accident on Highway 6 happened on a Tuesday night. My nephew had driven her north that afternoon. The car, registered to a numbered company since dissolved, was driven into the ditch and set on fire. The OPP investigation was complete in the way rural single-car accident investigations are complete, which is to say thorough enough and then closed. The fire had destroyed most physical evidence. The identification had been made through dental records submitted by her dentist of 12 years, a man who had retired to Portugal 6 months after the accident. His clinic's patient files had been transferred to another practice, but the records submitted to the OPP were not duplicated in the transfer. They did not match anything on file at the new practice. The investigator had also pulled the records from the cremation facility in Barrie. The name on the intake form was my daughter's name. The physical description was not. I read that sentence 3 times. I sat at my kitchen table with the report in my hands, and I thought about the morning in June, the rented boat, the thermos of tea. I had said her name into the water. I had let something go. I had watched it disperse. It had not been her. I called my nephew on a Sunday and asked him to meet me for lunch. I said I was struggling and needed family. He came without hesitation. He was warm. He ordered soup. He asked about my hip and whether I'd watch the hockey on Saturday. I had a small recording device in my coat pocket. My nephew was not a careless man in general, but he loved me, and love had made him believe I was still the person he could manage. I asked him to walk me through the days after the accident. I told him I had never been ready to hear the details before, but I thought I was ready now. He talked. He was careful with the information, but I asked questions that opened one door at a time, each answer making the next question easier to ask. When did you call the cremation facility? How did you know which one to use? Who gave you her dental records? Who was at the facility when you went? He caught himself once. He stopped and looked at me across the table with something close to alarm. I looked back at him with the face of a woman who only wanted to understand. He kept talking. By the time we paid, I had what I needed. I called my lawyer from the parking lot. I called the investigator. Then I drove home and packed a bag. I flew to Thunder Bay on a Wednesday morning. I had the window seat, and I watched the north open up below me, the lakes multiplying, the land growing dense and dark with trees. I had not been to Thunder Bay in 20 years. My daughter, apparently, had been living there for 22 months. I rented a car at the airport and drove to the address the investigator had given me. A rental house near the waterfront, on a quiet street with frost-hardened lawns and attached garages. I parked at the end of the block and sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. Then I walked to the door and knocked. She opened it. For the first second, neither of us moved. The recognition between us was complete and immediate. There was no processing on her face, no effort to place me. She had been waiting for this, I understood later. Some part of her had always known it was coming. She said my name, not a question, not a greeting. Mum. I had prepared things to say on the flight. I had composed and discarded a dozen versions. None of them came. What I said was, I scattered ashes in Georgian Bay. Her face did something I had no name for. She stepped back and I followed her inside. The house was tidy and small. Someone else lived there too. Men's boots by the door, a second coffee mug on the counter. She did not call out to anyone. We sat at her kitchen table. She talked for a long time and I did not interrupt. She had been terrified. That was where she started, and where she kept returning, as if terror were the only explanation that could cover the distance between what she had done and who she believed herself to be. She had not planned it calmly. She had panicked. She had called my nephew, and he had said he could make it work, and she had said yes because she could not see any other way. And she had been wrong. She knew she had been wrong. But by the time she understood the full size of it, it was already done. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I gave a eulogy at your memorial service. I stood at a podium in a church hall in Guelph in front of 60 people, and I talked about what kind of child you were. I talked about the bicycle accident. I talked about the time you were 7, and you held my hand all the way through a thunderstorm because you thought I was frightened. I said the world was smaller without you. She pressed her hands flat on the table. I know, she said. I paid down your debts on a pension for 2 years. I sold my car. I moved to a smaller apartment. Not because you asked me to. Because I thought it was what a mother did. I know, smaller this time. And you were here, ordering takeout and going to work, and you were fine. She was crying without sound, just water on her face. I did not comfort her. I had stopped wanting to comfort her approximately 2 days after I first read the investigator's report. I didn't come to give you something, I said. I'm not here to forgive you or to make this easier for you. I came because I needed you to see me. I needed you to sit across a table and look at what 2 years looks like on a person. She looked. There are people waiting for your call, I said. A Crown Attorney's office, your former employer, the OPP. My lawyer has been in contact with all of them. That process is happening whether you run again or not. I am suggesting you don't run again. I stood and put on my coat. She asked me, in a voice so small it barely crossed the table, if I still loved her. I thought about that question with my hand on her kitchen door. You were my daughter for 36 years, I said. I don't know how to stop. But love is not a wall between a person and what they've done. I learned that from you. I drove back to the airport. My return flight was delayed. I sat in the terminal with a tea and looked out at the tarmac, and I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I was standing on solid ground. Not happy, not at peace, just present, like something had snapped back into place. The legal process moved at the pace these things move. My nephew cooperated fully with the Crown. He received a conditional sentence, house arrest, 2 years probation, significant fines. He had not spoken to me directly since that Sunday lunch. I was not ready for him to. That conversation, if it ever happened, would proceed on my terms. My daughter pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000 and to public mischief in relation to the false death report. She received a custodial sentence of 14 months, followed by 2 years of supervised release. The judge noted the premeditation. The judge also noted that she had not fled when she'd had the opportunity. I had not expected that to matter to me. It did, a little. I visited her once during her sentence. It was a Thursday in February, the kind of flat gray February cold that settles into southern Ontario and stays. We sat across a table, and there wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said. She asked about my hip. I told her it was improving. She said she'd been doing a lot of reading. I told her that was good. Before I left, she said she didn't expect anything from me. I said I knew. She said she was glad I came. I didn't answer that. I was still working out whether I was glad, too. I moved back to Guelph in the spring, a different part of town, a ground-floor apartment with a small yard where I planted tomatoes in May and watched them do exactly what tomatoes do, which is look dead for weeks and then grow faster than you expect. I went back to volunteering at the public library. I took a watercolor class I was terrible at. I drove up to see friends in Barrie on a long weekend, and we sat on a deck and talked until we were cold, then went inside and kept talking. I did not go back to Georgian Bay. What I had scattered there was not her, but it had been real grief, honestly felt for someone I had honestly loved. That I had been deceived did not change the feeling. It only changed what the feeling had been about. Some mornings I still reached for my phone on Sundays before I remembered there would be no call. Old habits are slower to update than understanding. I thought about what my daughter must have felt in those last weeks in Guelph before she disappeared. I thought about how fear can make a person unrecognizable to themselves, and how the decision to save yourself at the cost of someone else's truth has a name, and that name is not fear. Fear is the beginning. What comes after is a choice. Dignity, I learned in the past 2 years, does not arrive as a feeling. It arrives as a decision. The decision to stop accepting someone else's version of your own life. The decision to say, I know what I saw. I know what I know. I will not be talked out of it. I had made that decision in a Tim Hortons on King Street on a Tuesday morning in November, standing at a counter with a coffee I hadn't yet paid for, watching a woman I was supposed to believe was dead walk out into the cold. Everything that came after had grown from that one refusal. The refusal to let the truth be taken from me quietly, the way so many things are taken from women who have learned to be accommodating, who have spent their lives making it easier for others to believe what they want to believe. Not this time, not again, not ever again.